All right, Fat Boys, you know that I did mess up last week in terms of I recorded things on time, but did not have time to edit. I was too busy emptying this place of all of the boxes that came up from Kenya, plus watching my former team win at an ICA tournament, which was fantastic. Did distract me enough that I didn't just post them until the other day. Apologies. Go back and watch it. Week 7 was exciting. But then you can get even more excited for this week in Week 8. It was a pretty eventful. I don't know if people watched a lot going on, some of it good football, some not so much. Certainly some injuries and some underperformances are going to score a lot of things that happened, but we're getting ready for the home stretch in fantasy sports, so get excited about it. Week 8 was awesome. We lead into an even more exciting Week 9 with the Germans getting some games and a lot of exciting things happening in our league, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, let's focus on the main stories from Week 8. Week 8 in the NFL brought with it a ton of action as per usual and a lot of league implications, which we'll get to. But first story that we got to talk about, and really the main one I want to talk about, quarterbacks. They were a massive issue this week, not just as in they're always an issue because they're so tied to our league in terms of that position, the wide receiver tight end position, and to an extent running back as well. But with injuries, in-game injuries being a big one. We'll get to the list of people who are backups that we knew were starting. But if you were watching the Falcons game, you saw Heineke. If you're watching the Steelers game, Trubisky got in there, which I don't know if you're happy or sad with Pickett. Mini is probably the big one. Minnesota lost Cousins, looks like for the year. The calmest Achilles injury I've ever seen. Just kind of stopped, said, I'm screwed, went out and wished everyone well. So Hall was in there. Stafford went down for the Rams and Rippon had to come in. And then in one of the best name-related NFL moments of my lifetime, I did not know he was even because if you think of in the Giants situation, they're already onto their backup with Tyrod Taylor. He gets hurt, and out comes Tommy DeVito. And if you have not seen Goodfellas and that name didn't ring a bell, stop what you're doing right now. Go watch Goodfellas and realize why I was so excited that this was happening. And it was going to go one of the two ways. Either you were going to get Tommy DeVito, the loose cannon, the hot-tempered, the crazy, the aggressive Tommy DeVito, right? The one that wants to know if you are amusing him. You get the quote. Or the other one was Billy Batts right, and he just needs to grab a shoe shine kit. Turns out we're going shoe shine because Tommy DeVito and the Giants offense in terms of the quarterback position had a net negative 9 yards on the game if you include all of the sacks that they took. So he might not have Joe Pesci. They might want to see what Joe Pesci's up to. He might do a better job in Week 9 if they have some similar health issues. But aside from that, we know there's a lot of quarterbacks that are coming in. We knew of Will Levis for the Titans in one of the coolest games, the Advertising Bowl. It was Mayo versus Mustard. Will Levis, if you do not know, rookie quarterback, but he was notorious in the offseason for putting mayonnaise in his coffee and putting it on social media because it's social media, so people care about that kind of crap. I believe it's Hallman's jumped on it and has him in an advertising campaign against Atlanta and Bijan Robinson, which if you haven't actually heard, Bijan's not how you're supposed to pronounce his first name, but that's how he insists it's pronounced because of his Dijon Mustard contract. So we had the Mayo versus Mustard Bowl. Mayo did take over and Levis looked good. If you type in Levis, though, into any Apple product, it autocorrects to Levi's. So expect a possible trade to San Francisco with the Levi's Stadium and maybe an endorsement coming up. He was your positive story of a backup that you knew that was coming in. But for people with young quarterbacks, I mean, I could complain about Love. That's not a backup. He's actually the starter and just plays that badly. But we know the Bears, Fields was still out. So the quarterback I will now refer to as Teabag because I think it's easier than enunciating his name. He was starting. The Browns are on the PJ Walker experiment still. He was starting and not doing great. That interception on 3rd and 3 that effectively cost them the game when everyone in the world is asking to hand off the ball. You have to think, if you are calling plays, if you call the play that the opposing fan base is going to be happy that you're calling, maybe don't call it. There you go. Free advice for the Browns coaches. And just in general, quarterback underperforming. You really can't ding any quarterback who gets hurt halfway through. I know you're probably swearing at them if you had them starting for you, but an injury is an injury. There were at least a couple big names, though, that just massively underproduced and started and finished the game. You know, Jimmy G's hasn't been a household name this year, but he didn't even get 5 points on Monday night, which is why Devontae Adams couldn't stop throwing his helmet. But probably the biggest surprise, our 1-2 from last week in quarterbacks. Mahomes was our number 1 last week. This week, he scored in most quarterback formats under 6 points. Some formats have slightly different kind of measurements. And Lamar Jackson, who was the quarterback 2 and went off last week as well, had under 12. So not some consistency, and certainly when we get to our top quarterback performers, when I get to the matchups, some are the normal faces, some are definitely new. This does lead to an interesting part in both the NFL, which just did its trade deadline. No real kind of sparks. Dobbs going to Minnesota be the only one that really impacts our league. No like McCaffrey like last year when that trade happened for those who were in the league then. But it mirrors kind of what's going on in our fantasy leagues. There's a lot of teams that started off hot that are starting to fizzle and might need to look to pick people up. People that started slow that are now starting to rise. And it's not too late yet. Both in the NFL, where essentially the AFC is evened out. The leader of every division is exactly 6-2. The only 7-1 left being Philly. We also lost our only team without a win. Carolina won, and the NFC is a little bit more gargled. But take a look at your league because it's not quite over yet. There's still deals to be made. Our trade deadlines are still up and running, and you might need them heading in for this week. So we're going back overseas or to my side of the pond in a super interesting game. We got Mahomes, who, if you were wondering why he didn't play that well, if you saw afterwards, he was actually quite sick. They were trying to rule him out of the game beforehand, but he insisted on playing, which is hilarious if you start thinking of how restricted COVID restrictions were only a couple of years ago. And now it's just like, if you can walk, you can play. That was partially due to, or partially contributed to his underperformance. He now has to take a plane. I believe they're flying on Thursday, so depending when this video goes out. Whereas they're playing the Dolphins, who apparently are already here. This game is in Germany, so it's going to alter when it's played. It's the early game on Sunday before the early games. And we also have 4 teams on a bye. If you've looked at your team roster already, we know we went back to the bye weeks after only week off. It's Denver, San Francisco, Jacksonville, and Detroit. So aside from all the quarterback issues, we've got 2 of the better running backs. McCaffrey, who is traditionally the number 1 running back in most formats. And then Etienne, who's been phenomenal in the previous couple weeks and is having a great season. They're both sitting down. 3 of the top 10 tight ends, I think 3 of actually the top 8 tight ends in most standard formats are sitting down this week. So lots of moves to be made. Maybe more eventful than the actual trade deadline will be our league's general trade deadlines, but let's see what happens. Anyway, that's enough from the NFL. Let's get on to last week's matchups and see how we fared. Well, after weeks of me actually saying, Chaz, you'll get your run, not only did he bounce back last week with his first win, but then really bounces back this week with not just a win, but the top score of the week and climbing out of the basement all in the same week. So I'm going to stop saying congratulations because now it kind of spurned me. Well done, though, Chaz. Can't really say this was close. I will say watching these games, it was actually kind of close with predicteds for a while, and then just suddenly it wasn't. Start with your top guy in Burrow. I mean, that's the week you've been kind of waiting for a while, and you stuck with him even after the really, really slow start. Looks like he might be healthy again, which would be good for you. Didn't crack the top 5. He was 6th overall in our quarterback ranking, although A.J. Brown is just definitely looking like the most consistent, productive receiver. You could make the argument for Tyreek as well, and Tyreek's highs have been a little bit higher, but I think that was the 5th or 6th consecutive game for 125 yards and a touchdown for Brown, so well done there. He was our wide receiver 3. Gibbs was our running back 1. Even you look at Waddle, he was just outside. He was the wide receiver 6, but that's the performance that he was putting up. If anyone had him last year, in the last 8 to 9 weeks of the season, that's what he was doing. So combined right there, every time I would make a list and it was like, who had the top of this or whatnot? I mean, even your kicker was the highest started kicker. You were the only kicker in the top 5, I believe, that anyone actually started, unless I made a mistake on that one. There could be a Dallas kicker in there that someone took. So well done on that one as well, right? So scores across the board. Weirdly enough, your only disappointment is actually Kupp. Maybe that offense is stuttering a little bit. Freeman obviously did okay, but that's only because his predicteds were quite low. We take a look at what you left on the bench. You had some injury issues, obviously, and you're dealing with that. So well done. You put up 150, almost 160. Do that. Keep doing that, and you will be in the playoffs shortly. Fortunately for me, I didn't lose my 6th spot. I was a little worried about dropping back down after my slow start. Remember, Chaz, we were buddies once. We were 0 for buddies, and now look at us go. 5 combined wins. But let's keep climbing. For me, I did have a few standout performances. Really just Kamara was the running back 5, I think, in our scoring. Walker didn't look healthy. I didn't love that, but he was against Cleveland's defense. Kelsey obviously was a big disappointment. Kind of expected Landa to do better against a Mayo-based quarterback, but unfortunately, I mean, I can go about. I just had disappointing after disappointing outings, and even someone like St. Brown had a great game, didn't even quite get up to standard, so that's where I'm at. Didn't have a whole lot on the bench, dealing with a bit of an injury, but I already have some game plans for next week, so Chaz, keep the climb going. Let's see if we can get you in the top spot, but just not my top spot. I want to keep my foot in the playoffs if at all possible. So that'll be my goal going next year. But 2 in a row, Chaz. Let's see how long you can keep this run for, buddy. Well done. Very, very close to the top scoring spot. Only, I believe, 8 or so points separated Kevin from Chaz on this one. But congrats, of course, you put up 150. Mark's similar to me, did not put up much of a fight on this one. Although not completely his fault, injuries were not his friend. Now, Cousins did get hurt after he had scored the majority of his points, but now he's out. And if you look at Mark's bench, maybe it's Mark's fault. Just saying, Fields, Montgomery, he's got some injury concerns. He's going to have to make some tough choices. Although the one nice thing about having someone who's completely done for the year in a non-keeper league, your choice is clear: cut, bait, and run. Waller's kind of a big one for him. He went out, during the game, obviously, and had a really disappointing performance after having a solid week. At least the Mustard Man did actually play this week, which I'm sure you were excited about. But overall, I mean, Mixon you're liking to see, and Gabe Dave was fine. And I mean, the fact that Denver has a bit of an offense must make you pumped. But this was overall kind of a not a outstanding performance. And then we got someone like Pollard who might be in bust territory. Compare that to Horst and his Philly special. They came out. Hurts was our quarterback 5. Devontae Smith was just outside of our top 5 wide receivers. But again, similar to what I said with Waddle, this was the kind of performance he used to put up last year as that second man. I think the biggest thing, he stole Gus the Bus. This is the 3rd week in a row Gus the Bus has been a top 5 running back. He was our running back 2. Hall was just outside of the top 5, but good for him. That's a good performance. Similar to Seattle's defense, didn't quite make it in, but 13 points on their defense. I would take it. We see here your bench actually went off in a decent amount too there, Horse. So you did have some options, and you're still biding your time before Jefferson and hopefully your bye-riddled week 10. So congrats, Horse. 6-2, nothing to sneeze at. That's top 4 in the league, and that's looking to put a hammer lock on it where the rest of us are sitting in the middle. So congrats there. Mark, the dynasty might be coming to an end unless you go on a Chaz-like run, because now he's past you. You've now dropped to the basement of the league. So I expect some movement and some action, so best of luck there. But in the meantime, Horst, keep the party going. In our premier matchup heading into it, we had our 2 of our top seeds getting after it, and we're going to see this 6-2 number a few times. I will get to that when I get to the league table at the end. But Justin, after some rough weeks in the last couple, came out with a solid performance and certainly took advantage of Jake, who couldn't quite get up to last week's status. The Buffalo connection worked, although not as much. Allen's spreading the love around. We already saw Gabe Dave with some points, so Diggs is getting there. But, really Allen had the performance he was looking for. That was in our scoring. That's the quarterback 2, so congratulations there. Kittle and the tight end. He was our tight end 3. So tons of points from 2 of your bigger guns there. In terms of everybody else, they just did what they should, except for obviously our highest scoring defense in Dallas. They were not the defense 1. They were the defense. Actually, no, sorry. They were the defense 1 in the scoring. I apologize. And not the only time they've been there. So Justin, your old favorites are coming back, which is always a strong sign. And everyone else is at least doing enough to get by. Jakey had a bit of a disappointing week, just under your predicteds. You didn't really have any outstanding runs. I mean, you had Hill, who's always been great, and in this particular case, he was our wide receiver 5. Everybody else was out of the top 5 for you, so that's not fantastic. I apologize. The kicker was our kicker 4. Should be paying attention there. My apologies. And I think I alluded to that one earlier with Dallas's kicker. You're getting some points along the board. Ingram obviously doing all right, and White doing a little more than expected, but just kind of middling. Whereas in the past, you've had Jackson last week go off. Hill's got off a bunch of weeks for you, and that's kind of helped you out. I think Jackson would probably be your biggest disappointment, and Kirk as well. I think I may have jinxed him last week on the review that no one had a chance to really watch, although it is up. I recommend going to see it because, come on, man, I made it. Go watch it. I did say at that point, Kirk was one of the unheralded kind of sneaky pickups that kind of consistently been cashing out. So obviously, massive jinx. Also one of the few wide receivers to not go off against Pittsburgh. So we'll just chalk that up to an anomaly and move on from there. Justin, you actually did leave our wide receiver in this league 2, in some leagues 1, depending on your point per reception, on the bench in Hopkins. But who would have known that Tennessee's offense would be so prolific, right? 28 points is a lot. I don't think they've scored that all year. So Something to play with, though, next week and gives you some options. So congrats there. Again, Justin, big one. Looks like we're tied here. Looks like this is going to come down to total points scored in terms of unlocking our top, I believe, 4, but we'll get to that later. In the meantime, Jake, you're still top of the mountain, so don't cry yet. And Justin, you're on your way back up there, so well done. Great week. Looking at another 6-2 in Ben, but a loss in this case. Ben could have taken over the league and been our number 1 seed, but Will was having none of it. This was one of our closer matchups, and that's 14 points. Because like I said earlier, we didn't have a lot of like nail biters down to the end. How did V do it? Chase coming back in Cincinnati's offense and resurgence was certainly something I'm sure he was pumped to see. Herbert overperforming, Laporta over the predicted, Henry over you're getting the common theme here. Although what's funny is there wasn't a whole lot that Will did in the top 5. Most players here, in fact, I think all of them just were outside and certainly excluded. I think Butler was the closest. He was our 6th best kicker. But when everyone but Zay Flowers does well, you can still score your 130 and walk off, especially compared to the fact that we got Ben, who had our running back 3 in McCaffrey, and our running back 1 on the season so far. Addison had a surprisingly good week considering his quarterback lost his Achilles at some point. Then he had a rookie come in, but they were high flying before they did that, and Green Bay is just looking all kinds of crappy. The big one's gotta be it's Mahomes, right? I mean, Ben must have been feeling good. If Mahomes does what Mahomes normally does, that's another 18 points. Ben wins by a couple. So he's probably not panicking on this one. He's just pissed off that a sick Mahomes didn't light them up and have his version of the Jordan flu game, but instead showed his mortality. Bench, nothing much to see here. I mean, Wilson could have been a bit of a help, but not enough. It really was Mahomes, Ben. That's what held you back. But hey, you're still tied for the top spot. Yes, you could have taken a loan on that mountain and been up there on your own, but you're still doing fine. And V, great bounce back. You're in the playoff picture. You're 500, which in this league is top 5, so that's exceptional. And yeah, well done, buddy. As long as you can stay in that top echelon, that's all you need to do. I feel like saying finally every time I'm talking on these. It's always Waylon almost, or Waylon had a rough, or just barely slipped out. It's one of the few tight ones that John took down. So congratulations. This was our tightest matchup, just over the 6-point mark. B, unlucky on this one. And we're looking at the records. Like I said, things are tight. 3, 4, 5 wins are pretty much tough to get by. So John's now tied at that bottom 3, but has the best scoring team. Due to often his unluck is why he only has 2 wins. B, with the 3 and 5, is kind of on the low end in the tie there, but all still in the mix. So how did B get it done? How did John get it done? Etienne has been massive for you. I think he's been one of the more consistent running backs over the last couple weeks, nay, even into the season. Eckler coming back and finally looking close to what he looked like before the injury, or what we expect him to look like. So congrats there. Even though it wasn't an amazing outing, it's definitely a step in the right direction. Tua did what Tua's normally going to do. The big things you got to worry about is obviously Adams, super frustrated. Clearly things are not going well in Vegas. I think a lot of people expected to see him dealt. He was not. So I'm also getting some reports that perhaps Jimmy G is not going to be the guy this week. So that might be a situation you got to keep your eyes on. Good for you for showing the humility of taking the Jets in defense. I know as a Pats fan, maybe you have to suck up your ego every once in a while. We all do when we're playing fantasy sports. So well done, because they were our 4th highest scoring defense, but 2nd highest scoring defense that people actually took because Denver and Giants were free agents. If we look at the bench, not a whole lot really would have done much for us, but if you look at John's bench, mostly went off, right? I mean, you won and you left points on the board. I mean, imagine Ridley over Adams. Imagine Dax going in. I mean, only 6 extra points, but hey, points are points. And I would assume Williams could slide quite easily, possibly into your flex here and done all right. But nice for you that you had enough people that even 17 points, you had 2 running backs who were better already. So well done, Waylon. A well-deserved win. B, you don't get discouraged with stuff like this. You've been in the game long enough. You know that you really just got to scratch that top 6, and you are tied for that spot, and I know that well. So here's looking that hopefully for you next week is a bounce back. And John, I'm glad I didn't have to say again, John got screwed by the other team going off. So let's see how that rolls and maybe gets you some momentum going into week 9. Before we look at next week's matchups, I mentioned this a bunch of times. If you haven't looked at our league table, it's freaking hilarious, right? Top 4 tied at 6-2. V's kind of by himself here with the 500, and again, that's good for top 5 in this league. We've got a couple people tied at 3-5. That's B and I, and then we got our bottom here. Some people started a hot and they're now dipping. I'm looking at you here, Rothwell, with 5-game losing streak. Gonna have to snap that one unless you're playing me. I haven't actually checked on that one yet. Whereas John finally got his win, and Chaz is now a wrecking crew with Burrow now pretending or going back to the way he used to be, and getting the solid fantasy points that we know he's capable of. In terms of the win streaks, if we're going to balance off our 5 losing, currently it's Horse has got the hot hand with 4 in a row. Not trying to jinx you on that one, because let's see how things go. There we go. It's B and I in a 6-7 matchup. So the 3 and 5s, there will not be a tiebreaker based on score alone on this one. It's going to be the win-loss, which is nice. If we look at kind of matchups that might seem a bit more league pivotal, we do have 2 of our 6-2s going after each other with Horst and Ben. That's obviously a big one, and we got some buys and injuries, etc. So that'll be nice to see. Whereas we've got our top versus our bottom. We've got some 3 and 8. The battle of the people who always make me screw up their names because they've named it after each other. And then can Chaz continue his run against a very 500 and even-keeled B? These matchups are going to matter. We're now heading into that second stretch. We've all been in the game long enough to know that team that randomly gets hot now, nobody is out of it. And I'm not even saying that just to be nice. We can see that. I mean, freaking 3 wins can actually put you in the playoffs if your score is high enough. So it's all in the hunt, as it always is in this league. The team that gets hot and makes the right roster moves in the next couple weeks might be the team that pops out. Or is one of these top 4 teams going to actually step up and start making a push to kind of put the league behind them? Only time will tell as we move into week 9. Just a reminder for those on either side of the pond, remember we're going back to a couple European games for a couple weeks now. I think 2 weeks in Germany. So a massive game. Kansas City, Miami play early on Sunday. So make sure that is something you've taken a look at. And obviously our Thursday nighter as per usual. So keep an eye. I'm assuming there'll be a lot of roster moves. There already has been with all of the issues that need sorting out. So let's see how the chips fall as we start our second half. So good luck in week 9, everybody, except for B. You can do well in week 10.